Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for coming on to this call for the Microsoft Reactor live stream event today. We are very excited to have Sidney Andrews, a Microsoft Azure MVP, present C# 7, 8, and 9 can completely change the way you write code. If this is your first time joining us, please note that for our Teams live event sessions, there's usually about a 20-second delay from the speaker's voice reaching the audience. So if you send a question over, he might respond, but you might not hear it straight away. So just as questions come up as he's going through the presentation, feel free to drop those questions into our chat. He'll be checking in on them and answering as the presentation goes on, or potentially also at the end if he's not able to get to it straight away. But just kind of put them through as you see them, just because, again, with that delay, he might not be able to respond straight away, and it's better for them to be there. And then also please note that we will be recording this session. It will be live on our YouTube channel, probably in about a few days, and you'll be able to see it there, and plus additional content that we've featured in the past. Sidney's doing a 4-part series. This is the first one of 4, so definitely check if you've come through on our meetup page, check the calendar for additional event dates where Sidney will be presenting on those as well. And that is my intro. Sidney, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Hey, everyone. Really excited to talk to you today. It's a short window, so I'm ready to just jump into things. But basically, I've been using the newer version. C# 7 might not be as new, but especially 8 and 9. The newer version is in C# to completely transform the way I write code for applications I build and demos and setups. Quick background, I do a lot of .NET developer training. So most of it is focused around Azure. Teaching developers how to use the different SDKs, use the different services. And a lot of times we find that when we're writing code, we can spend 10 minutes setting up the project before we go into a 1-minute demo. So it's been top of mind for me to spend some time for a while now going in and learning new features in C# so I can make the demos faster, make hands-on labs more efficient. And it's been a couple of years of doing that. And I thought, you know what, let's pause and let me share with people how learning the new features in C# has, again, transformed the way I wrote code. And I'm talking about writing code all the way back to like VB script days and building applications and Access. So I've been writing code for a while, but one of the fun things, you can get stuck in the older way of doing things. So hopefully some of these demos I show you today will help you look at C# in a completely different way. And I like to say, help you get unstuck in some of the ways we used to write code. So today we're going to use 3 tools. We are going to use Visual Studio Code. I just installed, this is a brand new machine, installed Windows 10 on it Monday. Visual Studio Code, just a vanilla install. The only extension I put in here is C#. Windows Terminal. It's pointing to PowerShell Core. And then I have a browser open. I have a couple of Azure services that I'm going to use in a couple of demos. Again, this is not really focused on Azure, but it's just easy for me to spin up a database in Azure so that we can use it in a demo. So the first thing that I ran into a lot was building out proof of concepts. Again, I do a lot of road shows. I do a lot of conferences like Ignite and Build. And a lot of times we want to show off stuff. Let's say the Azure Cosmos DB team is working on, which they're doing right now, a brand new version 4 of their .NET Developer SDK. And we want people to try it. So we have people, well, virtually now, but used to be physically at conferences, and we want them to get hands-on. We create a .NET Core Console application. So I'm going to just do that, .NET New Console. I'm looking at the Q&A. If at any time you feel like I'm not zoomed in enough, you can't read the text, just let me know. I'm happy to zoom in a lot more. So create a console application, .NET New Console. Jump into Visual Studio Code, and it's pretty simple. We have our CS project file. I'm running the .NET 5 release candidate 1. It's going to be the easiest way if you want to run a lot of these demos. And we're going to output an executable if we publish this. I'm a little bit crazy about spacing, so I'll get rid of all the extra space. And now I have a console application. Now, I teach .NET online, but the majority of my new audience are high schoolers and college students who've never done any programming before. So if I say, in order to print out hello world, I need 12 lines of code, I'm going to terrify this audience. They're going to look at this and say, no, 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 we don't want to do that. That's entirely too much. So I started looking into ways to kind of strip this down. If I walked into a high school and a teacher gave me their one class period, 50 minutes, to get a student excited about C#, what's the minimum I could do? So I started looking at what I could strip down. The first thing I found is that, well, namespaces are important. In enterprise applications, we can use them. And this isn't a new C#7 feature, but if we don't define a namespace, we put our class in a global namespace. So I wouldn't do it in an enterprise application, but if I'm teaching somebody C#, I would definitely do it. Removing accessors, things like that, that helped out a lot. But in C#9 and .NET 5, they take it a step further. So I'm going to just save this, prove to you that this works. So just .NET Run. If you haven't done a .NET build, .NET Run will automatically restore NuGet packages and build for you. The chain goes restore, build, run. Any steps you missed along the way, it will cover for you if there's been changes to the files. So this works, but watch this. This is called a top-level program. Pretty much every proof of concept I build right now is this. One of the great things is that it reminds me a lot of using tools like LinkPad. So if I go to .NET Run again, it'll run just the same. I can use this with packages. .NET add package. One package I really like is colorful.console. And just for those who are interested, and as I go, I'm gonna put each link in the chat. Go to NuGet.org and colorful.console is what I'm gonna use here. It just allows you to style your output. Again, as I go, I'll just put links in the chat. So I'll just put that as an announcement in the Q&A. Now, why would I use colorful.console? Well, colorful.console allows me to do something as cool as colorful.console.write ASCII. Now you may say, hey, Sidney, you seen red squiggly lines. That's because OmniSharp, the tool that Visual Studio Code is using for IntelliSense, stuff like that, it doesn't quite recognize this yet. So there's a couple ways I can solve this. I can either .NET build here, and it's not going to, actually, I need to comment that out. I can either .NET build to tell it the new, so that it builds with the new package. And notice it says, hey, your program doesn't contain a main method. That's because a top-level program has to have at least one line of code. It doesn't have to have any using statements, but at least one line of code. Otherwise, it's going to be an empty program that won't compile. So .NET build, you kind of made a little mistake there, right? And now what I can do is I can look at OmniSharp and bump the OmniSharp server. And all I did for those who, I just hit restart OmniSharp. Now, I can start using some of these classes I got from packages. So write ASCII, hello, reactor. Good typing day for me today. .NET Run. All right, that's actually the boring demo. Let me show you where this gets interesting. So a couple things I run into. I run into a lot of students who have Python experience. So they like the idea of bringing in a package and then just new functions and methods being available. Well, what if I just wanted to expose this write ASCII method to them and I don't want them to have to fully namespace this? I can do that by using static block, using static colorful.console. And that means any static methods off of this console class will just be methods that we can use as if they were fully namespace. So running that again, .NET Run. We can take it a step further. We can use this with system namespaces. So using system.console, instead of write ASCII, write line. .NET Run. We can even mask some of the classes. So let me show you what this is using alias. So what if I wanted to be able to do console.writeLine or console.write ASCII? So the first thing we have is we have a using system namespace, console.writeLine will work fine. .NET run. Then I could say using console, which will be my alias, equals colorful.console. So now console.writeLine will still work, but I can also do console.write ASCII. Hello for writeLine, ASCII for world, right? Let's run that. A little crazy, but I just want you to see all the different options we have. Somebody says, how do you know the version of C#? So the version of C# is going to be largely based on what SDK you have installed. So if you have the LTS version of .NET, you're going, which is .NET Core 3.1, you're going to have C# 8. If you have the latest version of .NET, which is not the LTS version, which is .NET 5 release candidate 1, and eventually is going to be .NET 5, you're going to have C# 9. So the C# version is packaged with the .NET version, but it doesn't have to be that way. So for example, if this wasn't a .NET 5 application, but there was a .NET Core App 3.1, then watch what happens. It fails. It says I need language version 9.0 or later. So if I go to the CS project file, now I'm going off of memory, and go to, and I have to actually Google this, or Bing it, I'm not sure which tool I'm using, CS Proj, C# lang version. It takes me to documentation around language version, and it says I can actually specify a language version in my CS project file. Let me zoom in on this. That's probably hard to see remotely. Basically, in my C# file, I can specify a language version. So let's say I don't have .NET 5 installed. I have .NET Core 3.1, or this project is .NET Core 3.1, which is the LTS version. I can say lang version preview, and you can actually spell out the language version in here. But preview will be C# 9. And if I got that correct, it should run. Fingers crossed. I don't have .NET Core 3.1 installed on this machine. Well, you know what? I'm not willing to give up on this yet. .NET list SDKs. Remember I said there's a brand new machine. I've only installed .NET 5 on here. It says, well, you don't have .NET Core 3.1. We're going to install it because it's a really fast install. .NET Core SDK. I'm jinxing myself. Watch, I have a demo bug. We're off script now, but this is totally something cool. Totally fine with showing it off. All right, so I'm going to install .NET Core SDK 3.1. That's the LTS version of .NET Core, long-term support if you're not familiar with that terminology. I'm closing Windows Terminal because if it's still open, there's a potential chance it won't know there's been an update. Kind of like with any command line tool. All right, fingers crossed, it's moving, it's moving. All right, so theoretically, if I do .NET list SDKs, I have 3.1 and 5.0. I'm going to CD into my downloads -demo folder. If I do .NET build, fingers crossed it'll build. .NET run. I just ran a 3.1 application using the C# language version preview to get C# 9 features, even though C# 8 is technically the version for .NET Core 3.1. So you can, that's something you can play around with. It's not fixed at all. It's definitely something that let's see, I can never remember the target framework names. We're gonna switch back to .NET 5. Just always check, make sure everything runs. It's kind of like a good build, right? Make sure we have a clean build before we start developing. All right, thank you for that question, by the way. It wasn't something I was planning to show off, but it is an important distinction if you've never played around with C# and .NET versions before. All right, one last thing I really wanted to show you about this, and I think it's really important, is around asynchronous stuff. So remember at the very beginning, I told you I do a lot of training on Azure. And pretty much every Azure SDK is asynchronous. This makes sense. You're reaching out to a remote service that could be fast, could be slow. So I'm going to .NET new console again to create a console application that's .NET 5. and has our regular program class. Now, in the past, when I had the demo, I had to do this. I had to do a private static method. Usually I return a task. So that means I have to add it using the system.threading.task namespace. Then I had to give it a name. I don't know, run my logic. I had to mark it as async. And then I could put my async code in here. So await task.delay. And then 500 milliseconds are half a second. I'm too crazy here. And then in my main method, I had to call run my logic dot wait, or you probably seen this one a ton of times. Var task equals run my logic task dot wait. This is everything I had to do to introduce asynchronous code. So you got to imagine in the early days when I was doing demos of the Cosmos DB SDK or the Azure SQL database entity framework and an ability to do resilient connections, it was painful. And I mean, this is what you had to do if you did a hands-on lab. So .NET Run. I mean, it works, but it's nasty from my perspective. So around, I want to say .NET Core 3.1 and C# 8. They introduced the ability to make your entry point. That's what we call this program.main method asynchronous. So it still required a little bit of lift because you still had to add the using system threading.task namespace, but you can now make this method async task. So .NET Run. And it's asynchronous. It's better. So now I only have to add 2 or 3 extra steps to my hands-on labs. But I am a greedy person. I want more. Well, remember we talked about top-level programs? So theoretically, this should work too, right? Yeah. So you can actually assume that your top-level programs are asynchronous, so you have access to await keyword. Now things are really turning up for me. So what I like to do is just show you, like, walk through a demo what I connect to different Azure services. And go through this a little fast. So building on what we learned, we have our system threading task. We can using console equals colorful dot console, using static system dot console. Everything we just played around with. I'm a .NET add package colorful dot console. Jump back in here, save it. Then from here, I don't know. The first thing I'll do is I'll do console.write ASCII, hello, comma, everyone. Write line, welcome to the talk. I like exclamation points. Run that, just make sure everything that we talked about so far works together. Yeah, it all works together. Beautiful. And I like to start bringing in asynchronous SDKs. So the first one I'm going to bring in is the, close this, the Azure Cosmos DB SDK. Now, I have an Azure Cosmos DB instance up here. It already has data loaded into it. If I go to Data Explorer, if I'm going off of memory, it has a retail demo database, a website data collection. It has 7 items. For those who are interested, basically I enabled notebook support. I downloaded the Get Started with SQL API notebook, which is here in the notebook gallery, and just ran the upload cells. And that allowed me to upload some sample data without having to have any files locally or anything like that. So this data, pretty simple, right? Now, in order to connect to Azure Cosmos DB, I'm going to use the Azure Cosmos package in NuGet. Again, as with every other package, I'm going to make an announcement and pop this on to the chat. So I just popped that onto the Q&A. Now, to download this package, you need to call .NET add package Azure Cosmos, and it's in preview, so I have to specify the version. No worries. All right. Now from here, I can add a using block using azure.cosmos, so I can use the library. So Cosmos client is a type. I'm going to create a variable called client, and I'm going to do new Cosmos client, and I need to pass in a connection string. Go back to Azure. I have this Cosmos DB instance. Just going to copy its connection string. Simple so far, right? Now, I'm going to call client.getContainer. I think the database is called retail demo, and the container is called website data, and save it in a variable type Cosmos container, named container. So nothing crazy. Now, this is very, very vanilla C# code. But one of the cool things is if you have your type specification on the left-hand side, or if you're using a method where the type can be inferred, you don't need to specify the type twice. That is perfectly valid C# 9 code. I don't need to specify the type on the right-hand side if it's already clear on the left-hand side. I'll take it even further. So I have this container, I want to get the items. So if I go to container, there's a method called getItemQueryIterator. It's a generic method, so we pass in a type and it'll give us an iterator. I can even pass in a SQL query. Select all from I. It's going to be my SQL query. Now I want to create a type. How do I do that? Well, with top level programs, just do that. We'll create a type at the bottom. So I'll call this cart item. I have an ID property. And I have an address property. So you can mix and match classes and methods. Now this will return an async pageable. So we normally would do like a while has more pages for each. But with both Entity Framework and the Azure Cosmos DB SDK for .NET, we can now use a special await for each that allows us to iterate over a synchronous page collection without us having to write the paging code. You know, rather have the product team write that pagination code unless we need to do something specific in the pagination so that we can just use it directly here. You can tell this is so new that even the syntax highlight is not quite there yet. Now from here, I can just right line this stuff. So I take this await for each and I say, item.id, item.address. So I'm going to print within a square bracket the ID for an item. I'm going to tab over and print its address. If I got this right, I should be able to do .NET run. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the talk. There's my items. The ID on the left-hand side within the square brackets, a tab, and then the address. Let's take this further. I'm only ever querying this database. I'm not modifying anything. So technically, I have setters because the SDK needs to set the property, but the SDK only ever sets the property initialization. So there's a special new keyword called a init. Now, init allows you to do this. Public var item equals new cart item. ID equals 1. Address equals 123 street. So we can initialize this, but later on, if we say item.id equals 2, we'll notice that this indexer can only be assigned when it's being initialized. So this allows us to make a property set only during initialization and not settable afterwards. This is really useful, again, if we're doing queries and we don't want to inadvertently change something. So let's just check to make sure my code didn't break anything. .NET run, fingers crossed, and it works. Fun fact, the sample code I just sent you in the chat works for both Cosmos DB SDK and the .NET Core SDK. Oh, sorry, the Entity Framework. So I use init properties anytime I use the Entity Framework to query, but not actually modify data. Two last features I want to show you, and I'm going to actually build a new application to do this. So I'm going to open a new tab in Windows Terminal, CD downloads, CD. I'm going to create a new directory called Nato. Oh, I already have a directory called Nato. So I'm creating a directory called Nato 2. Nato 2, I'm going to CD or change into that directory. I'm going to open Visual Studio Code in the context of that directory. And I'm going to do .NET new console app, or actually, I don't even need to do .NET new console. I should be able to just build this myself. Let's see. App.csproj. And then from app.cs process should be able to just do project SDK equals Microsoft Net SDK. Those are my project tags. I have a property group. Close that tag. Within that property group, my output type is EXE. And my target framework, Net 5.0. All right. I'm going to create a script file, script.cs. And within the script file, I'm just going to add a single line. String input equals Sidney. Now it's not being used, so I'm going to get a warning, but let me just try and build this. .NET build. Gives me a warning. I didn't use that input variable, but everything built successfully. I did that on purpose. That's exactly how you build a .NET project from scratch. No tools, no Visual Studio, anything. I do this because pull the curtain back. There should be no secrets, right, about how things are built. Now, I want to have some fun. I want to start using some more C# features to make my life a little bit easier. And I can do that by, I don't know, using the system namespace, using static system.console, just like we did earlier. I'm going to build an application that spells a word out using the Nato phonetic alphabet. So normally the way we do this, we do a big switch statement or multiple ifs, but C#7 introduced a new feature called pattern matching that got better in C#8. And I'm going to show you the C#8 way of doing this, and it gets even better in C#9. So how do we do pattern matching? Well, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to create a function that returns a string called a Nato func. It takes in a char called C. That's Nato func, right? Now, whatever character we get in, we want to return a string. So I guess if C equals A, return alpha. That's the intention, right? The problem here is that this would be really, really long to spell out. And there's we need to catch edge cases and stuff like that. Well, pattern matching, we can actually write this out in a pretty simple way. Pattern matching allows us to say C, which is our target variable, build a switch on this. So we're building a switch using pattern matching. Now for this switch, and you can tell again with these features, IntelliSense hasn't quite caught up with it. If you get a value equivalent to the letter A, then return alpha. And we could keep going. We could return the value of this if we want it. We can keep building them out. I'll show you something real fun thing I did last time. So I'm going to do Nato phonetic alphabet table. Let's see. Somebody has built a Nato phonetic alphabet table somewhere. There we go. So it looks like somebody in HTML has built the Nato phonetic alphabet table. I'm going to copy this, paste this into Word. Going to get rid of the columns I don't need. Again, if you got questions, feel free to add them in the Q&A. Get rid of the words I don't need, and this is pretty clean. I can work with this. So I'm going to copy this, go back to Visual Studio Code, and paste this in a blank window. Now, from here, I'm going to take advantage of this wonderful thing called regular expressions. Starting from the beginner line, we're going to capture a group. I need a uppercase letter, single instance of it, followed by one or more spaces. Now, when you find that, I want you to replace it with, actually, let me put the spaces outside of here. When you find that, I want you to replace it with a single quote, that uppercase letter again, single quote, then the symbol for the mapping symbol, our lambda symbol, and then double quote. If I got this right, fingers crossed. Yeah, there we go. And then the regular expression for the end is easy. The end of the line, right? Once we get to the end of the line, and I don't know, any white spaces before the end of the line, actually, I think it's just end of the line, we're going to put a double quote and a comma. Perfect. So cut, paste. I know I cheated quite a bit. We now have our switch. Now, we do get a squiggly line because there's an error. The switch doesn't handle everything. What if I pass in a letter that doesn't match? Well, there's a special use case in pattern match switches, that underscore. And I don't know, if we get underscore, just pass an empty string, we're good. So our string, we have this function. So we should be able to just do something as simple as, I don't know, write line, input, print out our input, and then for each char C in input.toUpper. I just want to make sure this isn't perfectly bug-free code, but just keeping it simple today. For each char in this word, I want you to print out within square brackets that character, tab over, and then print out the result of Nato func, pass it in that character. So character on the left, string on the right. So fingers crossed, I did everything right. .NET run. There we go. Sierra, India, Delta, November, Echo, Yankee. Last feature I'm going to show you is that we can actually create what's called expression bodied members. Expression bodied members are a shorthand for situations like this where we're just creating lots of curly braces just to make ourselves feel good. We have a function here called string Nato func. And the only thing it does is return a simple expression evaluation. We can actually get rid of these curly brackets in a return statement and just put in an arrow for our lambda symbol, depending on how you refer to it. And now it's an expression bodied member. We can use it still the same. Code-wise, nothing has changed. We run it, everything works the same. So again, this was a quick session, only 30 minutes, showed you a lot of the features I'm using day in and day out. I sent you a link in the Q&A for the sample code. I actually included some more samples in the sample code. So for example, we actually use Entity Framework. We use an expression bodied member. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more on this, to connect to a SQL Server. We use an expression bodied member to build a toString. We create the SQL Server using a using declaration. Then we do an await for each over SQL Server, much like we did with Cosmos DB. And this one, we're doing an actually really interesting switch. We do product, which is our product class down here. And we have a color property. So we say for product, look for the color property. And if the color is blue, return this string. So what I'm showing you is here in the gist. Again, I'm gonna publish this link one more time to the Q&A. We have some even more in-depth examples. So again, really quick, I just want to show you some of the really cool stuff that gets me excited about the newest language features in C#. We have an event survey. Rebecca's going to get on in a second and talk a bit about that. I'm going to be on the Q&A, so I'll be answering questions on the Q&A if anybody has any. And if you're interested in seeing more stuff about this, especially like pattern matching, tuples, some of the C# syntax are shown, please, make it known in the survey so that I can, plan it out and get back on and show you stuff. But again, if you haven't touched new C#7, C#8, C#9, get .NET Core 3.1, now get your C#7 and 8. You can play around with it. You can enable preview language version for .NET Core 3.1 to get access to C#9, or do like I did, install the .NET 5 SDK. But thank you all so much for your time. Again, any questions, I'm going to jump right over to the Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Sidney. So just to kind of circle back a little bit on my introduction, Sidney does have a few more sessions with us already on the calendar, but always looking for more, and he's happy to do it, obviously, he said. But yeah, so his next session is September 29th, and it covers how .NET has transformed teaching and demoing. So if you're interested in seeing more of Sidney's demos, definitely come through on that event or check out some of his future ones as well. We always ask that if you are not already part of the community, if you happen to hear about us through a friend, definitely join up with us. We have a YouTube channel, we have a regular calendar, we have Meetup. We post some of our events on Twitter, so you can check in there as well. And then we also just recently started a newsletter, which is the aka.ms/reactor email sign up, which usually features some of our highlighted localized events. While things are virtual, we will be hosting different events in different locations, but if you happen to be a night person or a morning person, you might want to check out some of those other calendars just because we might not feature them across all of our reactors. And then again, I posted it into the chat box, but we always like some feedback. We use that to develop our first party workshops. We also look for MVPs that can cover content that our community is interested in. Our events are always free. So definitely, if you can, if you've enjoyed these workshops and sessions, fill out a survey. The event code is 11741. Just submit that when you're putting your feedback through, and we really appreciate it. I haven't seen many questions come through. I feel like, Sydney, you answered a lot of the content that might come up. But if there are any questions, certainly feel free to post them now and Sydney will answer. I think we can give it a couple more minutes, Sydney, and if nothing comes through, we can call it a day.
Yeah, I think everybody here is already an expert in C#8 and C#9. I'm just showing them the features they already know, but I'm just enthusiastic and excited about it. So yeah, I'll be hanging around. Any more questions? And I'm jokingly in another browser window trying to pre-order Xbox right now. So I'll get your questions answered for sure.
Yeah.
But thank you everybody for your time. Really excited that you chose to come hang out with us, even with Ignite going on. So really excited to see you all here today.
Yeah, and on that, if you're not aware, Microsoft Ignite is currently hosting a 2-day, full day of sessions for developers. It's free. You can go to the Microsoft Ignite webpage, sign up for sessions. Many of them don't have caps for how many can be in the room, so lots of fun content over there as well for you to check out.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, we're doing a session, or Rebecca was talking about the next session in our series about how .NET has transformed learning. Please sign up for that. Tell your friends about that. That session is so exciting that I'm doing the same session for Ignite this week, and it's reached maximum capacity. We cannot have any more people come into our room to talk about .NET and education. So as the Reactor community, you're going to get a exclusive session that even people at Ignite couldn't get into the room for. That's how much I love this community. And again, sign up. We'll talk about it. There's some really cool stuff, really cutting edge, very early alpha preview stuff that's going to be really exciting that builds on what you saw in today's presentation.
Wonderful. And I think with that, it doesn't seem like there's questions coming through, so we will conclude today's session.